Once a thriving town in Oklahoma, which used to be a major national center for lead and zinc mining, today it's known as one of America's most toxic ghost towns. It's not easy to earn that kind of reputation. The city structures that weren't torn down, destroyed by fire or tornado, ended up abandoned. Many were completely or partially wrecked. The gorilla statue, which was put up here in honor of the city's soccer championship in 1994, towers over a completely empty parking lot. Over the past few decades, Pitcher's population has slowly shrunk, and as of now, the town is totally deserted. Let's figure out what happened and whether it was intentional. But first, let's grab a cup of coffee. Just an unobtrusive reminder, only to those who hit the like button. Don't forget to do it at the end of the video, or while you're watching. The city of Pitcher is located in the northeast of Oklahoma on the border with Kansas, right here. The closest populated spots in the Ottawa district that aren't ghost towns are Commerce, Quapaw, and Miami. No, not that Miami in Florida. This one has just 13,000 residents, but at least Miami's still around, unlike Pitcher. Over 100 years ago in 1920, there were 9,726 people living here. In 2010, 20. Now it's 0. It all began so full of promise. In 1913, lead and zinc ores were discovered in the northeast of Oklahoma, and the town of Pitcher sprang up almost overnight. The town was named after a man with the last name Pitcher, the owner of the Pitcher Lead Company. This was a private American manufacturing company known for its battery technologies. It quickly became clear that the town had the most productive mining site in the district. In 30 years, from 1917 to 1947, more than $20 billion worth of ore was extracted. That's a huge amount of money even today, but back then, it was just staggering. By the way, more than half of the lead and zinc used during World War I came from Pitcher. Naturally, someone had to mine the lead and zinc, and during the mining boom, over 14,000 people worked in the Pitcher mines alone. In short, life was in full swing. The town was growing, people were making money, but there was just one catch: the mines. The mines to which the city owed its existence carried serious dangers. The thing is, the methods of extracting minerals in the early 20th century were, at best, questionable. At worst, they just posed a threat to people's lives and health. Workers labored just below the surface, and this led to excessive, frequent cave-ins. Miners also drilled into the pillars that supported the caves, and that constantly caused problems too. And even when the mines shut down, the problems didn't stop because nobody planned on sealing them up properly. Acid mine water started leaking into the groundwater and the nearby Tar Creek. Besides that, massive piles rise around the city like a lethal mountain ridge. These piles consist of lead and zinc waste, and they are just enormous and unstable. As they get hit by the weather, fine toxic dust spreads freely through the air. This is what those slag piles look like on the map. Besides the main dark brown and orange ones, there are also light green areas. Those are mineral processing waste. The blue marks show where the river is spread out, and as you can see, the water is constantly in contact with the waste. You see the problem? It's huge. Naturally, all this waste, along with working in the mines, seriously undermined the health of anyone even remotely connected to the city. The miners extracting lead-zinc ore were far more prone to silicosis, tuberculosis, lung cancer, and liver failure than the average person of that time. And now we know that exposure to lead can lead to brain and nervous system damage in children, slowing growth and development, learning and behavior issues, as well as hearing and speech problems. But this is what we know today. Before, people in general, and the residents of Pitcher in particular, didn't suspect the dangers of lead. Families let their kids ride bikes on piles of slag, play in it, and even use it in sandboxes. Can you imagine how this affected their health? In 1979, water from underground mines started flowing into Tar Creek, resulting in the death of most plants and animals downstream. That's when the Environmental Protection Agency got concerned about what was happening. Officials were especially interested in the acidic water contaminating groundwater and soil in the area. As a result of their concern, millions of dollars were allocated to cleaning up the Tar Creek area and the town of Pitcher. But that still wasn't enough. Polluted water from 14,000 abandoned mine shafts, 77 million tons of mining waste, and 36 million tons of sand and sludge remained a huge problem for those trying to clean up the environment. and for the locals, of course, as well. It said that 34% of kids in Pitcher have been affected by lead poisoning, which can lead to lifelong neurological issues. Plus, the cancer rate in the area is higher than in the rest of the state. In the small town of Miami, there are now 4 dialysis centers. But strange as it may sound, not only the severe contamination turned Pitcher into a ghost town. In fact, by the late 1930s, the extraction of minerals started to decline, becoming unprofitable. It completely stopped by 1967, but there were still over 2,000 people living in the town. Over time, piles of waste started to loom over Pitcher in both a literal and figurative sense. Even after mining stopped, the waste didn't go anywhere, meaning the younger generation continued to be at risk. But not just them. A federal study from 2006 showed that 159 homes, businesses, and public buildings in Pitcher, including the town's school, are at risk of collapse due to significant subsidence. Since the inventory conducted by the Oklahoma Geological Survey in 1982, there have been 35 collapses in the area. The situation was close to critical, and one of the senators urged to buy homes from the locals so they could move and avoid danger before it was too late. Then, more than 200 families moved over the next 2 years thanks to this money from the federal government. But the challenges that Pitcher faced didn't end there. People still remained in the town, and they were still in mortal danger. In 2008, a powerful tornado with wind speeds of up to 200 miles per hour leveled the southern part of the city. As a result, 7 people died. Many were injured. The disaster worsened the lives of the remaining residents of the city. Why didn't they move away? In 2008, the Oklahoman reported that some residents felt the payout amount was not high enough to start a new life in a new place. Whatever the case, the federal buyout process was completed, and the town stopped municipal operations on September 1st, 2009. By June 29, 2009, all residents received checks to be able to move out of Pitcher for good, but there were some who didn't want to leave their homes. In 2010, according to the U.S. Census, there were actually 20 people living within the former town's borders. By January 2011, there was just 1 business and 6 houses left in the former town, with the owners refusing to leave no matter how much money they were offered. This went on until 2015, when the last resident of Pitcher died, and the town finally became a ghost town. The buildings that haven't collapsed yet are holding on by a thread. Decades of unchecked underground soil extraction have dangerously undermined most of them. Any instability in the ground, strong winds, or some other event like, a moose crashing into the wall, and the building could come down. It's dangerous to be here. Today, Pitcher is an abandoned ghost town with boarded up windows and do not enter signs, and it's really better not to go in there. Pitcher's a popular ghost town because of its toxicity. It's usually listed among the top 10 most dangerous cities in the world. However, there are a lot of stories like Pitcher's. Take Rhyolite, for instance, once one of the most thriving mining towns in Nevada, but that was back then, because all that's left are crumbling concrete remnants, broken facades, and a shut-down train depot on the outskirts. A typical story of a quick rise and an equally fast decline. In Nevada, there are more than 600 ghost towns. The majority of them are leftovers from the rise and fall of the area's mining boom. For Rhyolite, it all started with a gold prospector named Frank Shorty Harris, who discovered gold in the area in 1904. Over the next few years, Rhyolite, named after the silica-rich volcanic rock of the region, thrived. In a bustling town, there were 18 grocery stores, 19 lodging houses, and 50 saloons, as well as a miners' union hospital. At its peak, Rhyolite had 8,000 residents who enjoyed modern conveniences like concrete sidewalks, running water, and electricity. The train depot brought in passengers and freight from 3 different rail lines, and one enterprising miner even built a house out of 50,000 beer and liquor bottles. In short, people worked and had fun here. However, by 1910, the mines began to fail. 10 years later, only 14 people remained from the 8,000-strong town, and today, just ruins. Many ghost towns had a similar journey. St. Elmo, Chaffee County, Colorado, attracted over 2,000 residents in the 1880s when gold and silver mining hit its peak. However, by the end of the decade, lower quality ore led the town into decline. And while St. Elmo still had a chance at the beginning of the 20th century, by 1936, the industry had completely left town. Now a couple of people live there, and ghost town enthusiasts wander around. Kennecott, Valdez, Cordova, Alaska was established as a mining town in 1903 to take advantage of the copper deposits in the area. By 1938, the mines were exhausted and the town was practically abandoned until the 1970s when tourists started to visit. Founded in 1862, Bannock, Beaverhead County was briefly the capital of the state of Montana. Up to 10,000 people lived in the area trying to make their fortune in gold, but by 1870, all the easily accessible ore had been mined out, and the population quickly shrank to a few hundred. Then the town had another short period of boom, but by the 1940s, Bannock was completely deserted. And there are hundreds of such stories in the U.S. Coincidence? No. There's a specific reason for the appearance of so many ghost towns. What does science say about this? Well, science defines a ghost town as an abandoned settlement, usually one that has visible remaining buildings and infrastructure like roads. So it's not just some barely noticeable ruins, but actually houses and stuff in between. Ghost town appears because the economic activity that kept it going, anything industrial or agricultural, comes to a halt. The reasons aren't important, people just don't find it worth living there anymore, and without people, the city fades away. But there's also another frequent reason for ghost towns popping up: natural disasters. Though some researchers think it's wrong to use that term for such towns, in the end, it should really only refer to communities that have lost their economic viability. I also like the phrasing in the book Ghost Towns of Texas. The author defines a ghost town as a town for which the reason for being no longer exists. For example, the gold rush often brought a flurry of activity to some super remote corner out in the middle of nowhere where a town would pop up, but the gold mining would stop once the resource was tapped out, and with that, the settlement would die off. Basically, cities that grow fast can fade away just as quickly. For the U.S., this has been a kind of set pattern since the gold rush days. First, you find a profit source, create a settlement, cash in big, and when the source dries up, you take out the city and relocate to a new place, where there's a different income source. That's how cities emerge and disappear. They just have a lifespan of their own. Actually, ghost towns are primarily associated with the Wild West and people flocking to areas with valuable resources like gold and silver somewhere in the Rocky Mountains, or with oil in Texas. That's why most ghost towns date back to the period between 1880 and 1940, when there was westward expansion and active industrialization of everything that could be industrialized. As of today, there are over 3,800 ghost towns in the U.S. When it comes to the number of ghost towns by state, Texas and California top the list, thanks to their mining and oil towns. Right behind them are Kansas, bordered by Pitcher, Oklahoma, and South Dakota. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, cities were created and left behind here. They came and went. They all fell victim to a changing industry, but the fate of ghost towns can differ. Some of them survive in a nearly ruined state, others are designated as national parks, meaning they're preserved. And just a handful of towns are transforming into upscale vacation spots. Sure, it's a pretty popular idea to take a holiday in a ghost town from the Wild West days to feel a little like you're in Red Dead Redemption. And right in the middle of writing the script for this video, I came across an interesting study. It turns out that in 2018, scientists did a huge archaeological dig in ghost towns in Utah, Arizona, and Nevada. They uncovered a ton of sites, then were able to compare and connect the process of abandonment, as well as aspects of life in each of these towns. It turned out that not all abandoned settlements were mining towns. Only about 45% of the towns identified by researchers as ghost towns were centered around the mining industry. That is, they depended solely on the mine, for example. Other places were religious settlements, railroad towns, military outposts, while in the Pacific Northwest, ghost towns were mainly tied to fishing and logging. So it's wrong to assume that all abandoned settlements were deserted just because the gold, silver, oil, or whatever their residents were extracting ran out. The desolation of most ghost towns stemmed from a complicated mix of a whole lot of factors: social problems, overuse of natural resources, plus some kind of water shortage. Long story short, it's like the meteorite and the dinosaurs. It played a role in their extinction, but wasn't the key reason. In other words, it was in the right place at the right time. And now a question that came to me when I realized that most ghost towns are just standing there, gradually getting worn down by time. So why don't they get demolished? especially since mining companies today also create towns to support their mining sites. These are temporary settlements with all the needed amenities, including shops, and then when the mining ends, the settlements are just dismantled. To simplify the process, they even use modular buildings. Quickly set it up, quickly take it down. But most ghost towns were created a long time ago, and back then no one really thought about what to do with settlements after their expiration dates. Or maybe someone did think about it and still didn't do anything. But modern people get it, so why are ghost towns still around? Turns out there are several reasons. First of all, if the government doesn't own the buildings, it has no right to do anything with them. Tear them down, improve them, rent them out, and so on. Only the owner can do that. Just like they can choose to use or not use their own property. Now imagine a ghost town built in the 19th century. What owners? They're all dead. But let's say it's still possible to figure out who the owners are since the city's pretty new. And this brings up the second reason why ghost towns are still around. A lot of times companies or building owners simply can't afford to demolish them. It's the machinery, the hired workers, the time, and money, naturally. So what do we have in the end? It turns out that tearing down ghost towns is throwing money down the drain. I mean, usually all the companies that created these now abandoned settlements work on a simple scheme, spend money on a project, and make even more money off that project. If you add the demolition of a ghost town into the mix, that's going to be cost that won't bring any benefits. You're just going to spend money and that's it. What businessman would like that? Okay, so tearing it down is too expensive. What if we went the other way and restored the ghost town? Did a little necromancy? And some ghost towns really have been brought back to life for various good reasons. One of them is historical tourism, creating a new economy that can support the residents, so when the residents have something to do in town, it thrives. Makes sense. For example, Walhalla, a small town in Australia. Once gold was mined here, but the mine shut down in 1914, and Walhalla became almost deserted. But the town got lucky. Thanks to its accessibility and proximity to other attractive spots, there's been an economic and tourist boom lately. As of 2023, the town had 20 permanent residents, but most of the houses were used as tourist accommodations. Some ghost towns, like the Italian Riachi and the Spanish Muñatello, are inhabited by refugees and homeless people. In the U.S., there are places like this too, and the most striking example is probably the town of Centralia, Pennsylvania. You might have heard of it. There are quite a few videos about it on YouTube. To put it briefly, it used to be a thriving community of coal miners, which was then almost wiped out by an underground fire in the coal mine. The fire hasn't been put out yet. The mine has been burning since 1962. It's thought that when the fire broke out in Centralia, there were 1,500 residents. Today, only 5 remain. Yet Centralia is a one-of-a-kind tourist spot. Here, visitors can see the underground fire, which experts say might burn for over 250 years. Overall, it seems that tourism is the only opportunity for ghost towns to have any kind of revival. There aren't any other reasons to restore and resettle these places. For people to live, they need jobs, all kinds of infrastructure, and none of this just gets made for the sake of it. There has to be some strong economic incentive. And although history shows enough examples of ghost towns being revived, tourists have always had a hand in it. It's interesting that some ghost towns are still inhabited, so it's not entirely clear whether it's correct to call them ghost towns. The reasons for living in an abandoned town can vary widely. Sometimes the locals simply refuse to leave their homes along with everyone else during relocation and end up staying alone in an empty town. Sometimes these people are even called squatters, meaning those who have settled somewhere without permission from the authorities, even though technically these residents of ghost towns are just living in their own houses. Often the population of such ghost towns ranges from 3 to 12 people. So I'm still not sure that ghost town is the right term. Some people settle there because they're into studying ghost towns, their history, and all that. Others try to revive them, like opening saloons or other local attractions to draw in tourists. As you recall, it all hinges on tourists here. And there are people who intentionally move to abandoned towns because it's quiet, peaceful, and there are no issues with neighbors. But ghost towns have other residents too, those that come to take the place of people. In Bodie, California, located in the high desert, you can't open a car door without hearing the piercing cries of the ground squirrels. Once, Bodie was a gold mining town with a population of 10,000 people, and then in 1962 it was turned into a state historic park. But few could have guessed that the abandoned town would become a refuge for ground squirrels, few including probably the ground squirrels themselves. They could have gone extinct. Climate change made the ground squirrel's usual habitat too warm and humid, so they started looking for a new place. They found Bodie. The weather here is harsh, with strong winds, freezing summer nights, and snowy winters when temperatures drop to -4 degrees Fahrenheit. But it turned out to be perfect for the ground squirrels. Bodie's a real magnet for wild animals. It's also home to pronghorn antelopes, coyotes, mule deer, badgers, jackrabbits, and bats. None of these animals are bothered by tourists, even though Bodie gets up to 200,000 visitors a year. If I were a ground squirrel, I'd start charging for entry. Celebrations in Pitcher. Pitcher is a dangerous place where you might fall right into the ground and the remaining buildings are at risk of collapsing on you from a single strong gust of wind. Yet in 2022, this ghost town in Ottawa County briefly came back to life when hundreds of people gathered for the 8th annual Christmas parade. Yes, a parade took place in a ghost town for the 8th time, and it most likely happened in 2023 too. Surrounded by massive heaps of garbage and collapsing buildings, around 2,500 people gathered along Pitcher's Main Street. The 45-minute parade included over 100 floats, horses, antique trucks, convertibles, fire trucks, and Mr. and Mrs. Santa Claus. Basically, everything was just like it's supposed to be, except it was a ghost town instead of a normal town. For former residents, these parades become a chance to reconnect with old friends. They still don't seem safe to me. More ghost towns are coming. According to a new study, by the year 2100, the United States might look completely different. Nearly 30,000 cities across the country could turn into ghost towns, with a population decline ranging from 12 to 23%. This would be due to a combination of low birth rates and active migration. Researchers from the University of Illinois said that all American cities except those in Hawaii and Washington, D.C. would be affected. Japanese ghost towns. In Western countries, people have already gotten used to the idea of a national housing crisis, meaning there just aren't enough homes. But in Japan, however, there's the opposite problem. Millions of Akiya, empty and abandoned homes scattered all over the country that no one wants to live in. Sometimes they're called witch houses, since these buildings are often old and run down. Many of them are in rural areas. Only 1 in 10 Japanese people live outside the city, so finding buyers for these witch houses is really tough. People just don't want to live in a ghost village surrounded by ghost houses where there are no hospitals or stores within walking distance. 6 years ago, when the last government survey was conducted, there were about 8.5 million Akiya in Japan. Since then, the number has surely increased. The problem of abandoned homes in Japan isn't new, and it all started back in the post-war period in the 1950s. That's when Japan's urbanization and industrialization surged, and homes weren't built anymore to last for several generations. The goal was just to quickly provide housing for a large number of people. As a result, homes in Japan came to be seen as something much more temporary than before. A house that's been lived in goes for next to nothing because Japanese buyers now prefer newly constructed homes. It's kind of like with cars. According to some reports, Japan has the oldest population in the world, with nearly every third citizen being over 65. When people reach old age, many leave their family homes in favor of smaller, more accessible housing. Naturally, nobody wants to live in such an old house anymore, and if the homeowner dies, well, you can forget about that house. It'll just stand there empty until it falls apart. Ghosts from the deep. Have you ever heard of the town of Whiskey Flat? It got the classic story of a California gold rush town. A couple of name changes, bloody conflicts between prospectors and Native Americans, about $12 million worth of gold mined, and even a few Hollywood movies shot there, including the Oscar-winning Stagecoach by John Ford. Even the westerns that weren't filmed in Whiskey Flat were often inspired by it. In 1954, the construction of a dam on the Kern River to create Lake Isabella Reservoir flooded a town. Most of the buildings were either dismantled or moved to higher ground before the lake was filled, but some ended up buried under the water. But then California got hit with a mega drought, the water level dropped to just 8%, and Whiskey Flat unexpectedly resurfaced from the depths. If this were a horror movie, weird stuff would start happening next, but everything ended well. People were amazed for a bit, and then in 2023, the lake filled up again due to snowmelt in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and the ghost town sank back underwater. As usual, you owe me a like. See you later.